Hi everybody, it's Tim Sweetman here from the Siloam Wellness Centre again, and if you've never checked out what we're about, you can jump over to our website, which is www.siloam.org.au. Siloam is Siloam. Essentially, we're about creating spaces for hurting people in different seasons to connect with themselves and in safe community with others and to God. And we've seen the Holy Spirit do some beautiful things in the lives of many people as folk take a rest from demands of life and just posture before the Lord. So that's www.siloam.org.au, and you can check out more of what we do. But for now, I'm bringing the second message in what's a little bit of an awkwardly titled series called Jesus with the disciples in boats, on seas, in storms, at night. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but I just noticed that Jesus had powerful moments with his disciples in this context. Last time, the last message that's online is that we saw the story about Jesus asleep in the storm. This time we're having a look at a similar story, but it's the one where Jesus walks on water in Matthew chapter 14, verse 22 to 29. So just listen to this story and what happened. It's incredible. It says, immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he, that's Jesus, went up on a mountainside by himself to pray, and later that night, he was there alone, and the boat with the disciples in it was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. And when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, Jesus said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. And I know there's a little bit more to this story that most of you might be familiar with, but we're going to stop right there in this story right now, because this is an absolutely incredible moment when Peter gets to walk on the water with Jesus. But overall, I have to admit, I begin by feeling a little bit sorry for the disciples in this story. I mean, it had been a huge day already. Like, this event happened right after that incredible moment of the feeding of the 5,000. So like, Jesus and his disciples were in a remote part, far north in Galilee on the side of the sea. And Jesus had been teaching and ministering, like doing miracles amongst a large group of people, 5,000 people. And this had been going on all day. And they got to the end of the day, and the disciples, I guess, feeling quite exhausted, said, Jesus, let's dismiss the crowd, because this is remote. They've got to all go and get something to eat. We're exhausted. We want to stop. And it's in that moment that Jesus says, no, don't dismiss the crowd. You give them something to eat. And I think the disciples would have been like, well, that's impossible. I mean, that'd cost more than a year's wages. And where would we even get that kind of food from? All the way out here. And of course, in that moment, Jesus then did that incredible miracle of multiplying food so that it fed 5,000 people. And I know the disciples didn't need to prepare all of that, but can you imagine after a long day having to distribute food to 5,000 people? I think they would have just been exhausted. But then this is where this moment comes. It says then that immediately in that moment, like not after a little rest, not the next morning, immediately Jesus made them. He made them get into the boat and cross the lake ahead of him. And you've got to hand it to the disciples. They did it. They moved with what Jesus said. Exhausted as they were, they heard what Jesus said, and they pulled their tired bodies into that boat without Jesus that evening, and they set out to do exactly what Jesus had told them to do. To that night sail across the Sea of Galilee. And this is where I start to feel a bit sorry for them, because in verse 23 and verse 24 it says that later that very night he was there alone. So Jesus was on top of the mountainside that he'd gone up alone, and the boat that the disciples were in was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Hang on just a minute there. I mean, they were just doing what Jesus had told them to do. Tired as they were, I didn't think they would have even really wanted to, but they had moved with Jesus on this one. But things got hard. The wind was against. The waves began to buffet the boat. And just so you don't miss any detail here, it says that Jesus didn't actually go out to them until just before dawn. And it says that at that point, the boat the disciples were in was a considerable distance, a long way from shore. So let's put all this together. To move with Jesus, the exhausted disciples hauled their tired bodies into that boat, and while Jesus went up on the mountainside alone, they set out without Jesus in what Jesus had told them to do in the fading light to cross the lake alone. And that's when things went bad. The wind buffeted, the waves came and smashed and threatened the boat, and they ended up being there alone without Jesus in a really tough situation. And this happened all night, for hours through the night. And you can imagine the things that were going on through their minds. So I imagine some of them would have been thinking, Jesus, this was not our idea. We only did this because you said to. I thought that's when blessing's supposed to come. But look, things have got hard. Everything's going from bad to worse. We're alone. We're miles from shore. And we are about to go down. I wonder if others were thinking, well, Jesus, I don't really want to give up. I like doing what you've led us in, but I've only got so much strength and it's about to give out. And I don't know what happens then. Like, what happens when my strength gives out? I've tried everything in following you. I don't think I can hold on much longer. Others were probably thinking, well, where is Jesus anyway? I mean, he went off to the mountainside to pray and he sent us out here. Some would have been thinking, well, does he even know what's going on? Is he going to come for us? Some would have been thinking, we've been struggling all night and I've been looking for Jesus, but I can't see him. Is he going to come? Have you ever had moments like that? As you've just honestly tried to live for Jesus? Just moving in the way you know Jesus has called you to live, or moving in how you think Jesus has called you, and things have got tough. And the wind has come against and waves are buffeting the boat. Maybe even recently you've had those same thoughts as what the disciples probably had. Maybe you're in a situation and you're just thinking, look, I didn't do this on my own. I'm moving in obedience with you, Jesus. Isn't that supposed to be when blessing comes? Isn't that when we see the power? But look, nothing's working. The wind and waves have come. Things are just going from bad to worse. It's hard. Maybe you identify with that thought, Jesus, I don't want to give up in living for you. But I know I've only got so much strength, and I know I'm working through my reserves, and I know I'm not going to be able to keep this up for much longer, and I don't know what happens when my strength gives out. Or maybe you're like one of the ones who will, like, Jesus, do you even see what's going on here? Maybe you've thought, I can't see you in this storm, Jesus, and I don't know, I feel really alone, and you're somewhere else, but you're not here. And maybe you've got that question, are you going to come? Jesus, do you even know what's going on? Jesus, are you going to break in? Jesus, I can't see you, and I can't see my way through this. I want to say right in this moment that if this is relevant for the point in your journey of following Jesus where you're at the moment, this is some of the most challenging, lonely and difficult times that we face in our journey with the King. I want to empathise with you in that. It's not an easy place to be. But I do also want to maybe just show you that it's this very moment in this story where Jesus broke in the most incredible way. In verse 25, we're going to have a look at it. It just simply says, shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. And don't you just love it how in the Bible, the most mind-blowing things are just so simply stated in 4 short words. So for impact's sake, don't miss the significance of what's being said here. Put yourself in that little boat pitching around violently in the wind and the waves shortly before dawn, and then let these words sink in that shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them from the mountainside where he was to the considerable distance from land that the boat was. Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. And just so you know, I don't think it means this. Like this guy's worked out how to do it and it's great, but I don't think this is what Jesus was doing that night. And there's some pretty serious scientific, intellectual sounding hypothesis out there about how this happened in this moment by natural phenomena. Well, I just want to let you know, I'm not there. I don't think that's what's going on here that night. I think this is what's going on. That night, Jesus supernaturally did what no one had ever done until then, that shortly before dawn, Jesus came for his disciples by actually walking on top of the water, unaffected by the wind and the waves. He came to them to rescue them like that. And this is so cool because often when we're in situations that just get hard, when we're just trying to move for Jesus, the question that runs through our minds and plagues us is, Jesus, I'm just trying to follow you, but things aren't working. Things have just got hard. I'm coming to the end of my strength. I'm about to go down. And are you going to do anything? Jesus, are you going to come? I can't see you, Jesus. Are you going to break in and come? And I want to let you know with an ironclad guarantee that the answer comes from this story. The answer's right there, and it's this. Yes, Jesus did come. Yes, Jesus will come for you. Yes, Jesus will always come for you. Yes, Jesus has never thought of not coming for you. Yes, Jesus will never ultimately leave you abandoned in your greatest time of need when your heart is focused towards him and moving in obedience with the things he says. Jesus will come. And this is where I really felt strongly. This is a word for some, because the wind and waves have hit you and you're still hanging in there living for Jesus. And you're moving in what he's leading you in, but things, instead of experiencing abundance and blessing, things at the moment are just hard. And things have gone from bad to worse for you, and you can't see Jesus, and you can't see your way through. Well, I want to declare this beautiful kingdom reality and revelation for you right now. Jesus can see what's happening for you, and Jesus is coming. He will come. Jesus has never thought of not coming for you. Jesus is going to break in. Jesus will not leave you abandoned in your place of moving with him in what he's called you to when the wind and waves come. He won't leave you there alone. He's going to come. He's going to do something. He's going to come and break in, and he's going to rescue you. It's an incredibly comforting thing. Please don't believe anything else, because it is not true. Jesus comes for his people who live for him. It's what he does. It's who he is. But there is something about his coming that is crucial that we pick up on here in this story. It's in verse 26. And it says in Matthew 14, verse 26, when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, get this, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. So just put this in perspective. This was Jesus coming. This was Jesus breaking in for his disciples in the middle of their hardship and difficulty. But when they first saw Jesus coming, they didn't recognize him as Jesus, because they didn't have a paradigm to understand a Jesus who comes walking on the water. That's what's going on. So this was Jesus coming for them, but it was way outside their familiar and their expectations. This was Jesus coming for them in a way that was, well, bigger than their theology. And this was Jesus coming for them. It is Jesus breaking in, but it was outside even their grasp of reality. Oh, this is huge. So although this was Jesus breaking in for a moment out there in the storm, the disciples, they didn't recognize it as Jesus. It was just so different. And so to them, it actually looked like their situation was going from bad to worse. They kind of went, "Oh my goodness, now we're not just contending with the wind and the waves. Now we've got an evil spirit bearing down on us." And they panicked. They had a freak out session out there in the boat. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." And I love this from Jesus, because in other words, he's actually saying, "I know this is really weird for you. I know this is outside what you're familiar with or what you expect. I know this is outside what you even believe of me. I know this is well outside of what you even understand is possible." But it's Jesus saying, "But you know what? It's me. This is how I'm coming for you. This is how I'm breaking in." And we have to notice this in this moment in this story, because the beautiful truth, Jesus will always come for us. Always, always, when we're moving with him, Jesus will always come for us. That's the unbendable, undeniable truth. But he doesn't just work within our paradigms. He doesn't. He doesn't just work within the time frames that we think bind situations. He isn't tied to what our experience of reality is. He does not usually work within our own theologies and our own understandings of him. He rarely stays within our familiar or our expected. And the sooner we actually acknowledge and accept this on our journey, the better, because this is how Jesus has been working for all of time. I don't know if you remember Lazarus, the story of when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. I mean, Jesus waited 3 days after Lazarus had died to even turn up. And then when he turned up, he didn't just do a healing, he raised Lazarus from the dead. That was people laughed at Jesus that day. They did not think that was possible. Do you remember that time Jesus spat in the dirt and he mixed up mud with his saliva in the palm of his hand, and he wiped it on a blind guy's eyes? And he said, "Okay, now go and wash that off at the pool of Siloam and you'll be healed." Can you imagine what that guy was thinking on his way to the pool? Thinking, well, that's not what I expected from Jesus. Man. Do you remember when the disciples needed money to pay tax? Jesus said, "Yeah, well, we'll pay the temple tax." And he said to Peter, "Go down, have a fish, first fish you catch, reach in and pull out the coin that's in there and that's how we'll pay our taxes. Can you imagine Peter thinking, like, what? Jesus? You're saying a fish I catch is going to have money in it? And that's exactly what happened. Jesus has never really worked in normal kind of ways. Get this one. Jesus brought true kingdom life to the world and established his kingdom on earth by what? By dying and rising again. This was far outside of what any of those disciples figured was the way that the Messiah would bring the kingdom through his death. It just wasn't normal. So let it come as this incredible comfort for you today, you who in the middle of following Jesus are experiencing things going from bad to worse and wind and waves coming over. Jesus will always comfort you in that moment. Jesus will break in. He'll actually do something much more than what you can do. He will bring things about and come in a way that rescues you, but it won't probably be what you expect. And it will probably be outside the time frames that you think are important, and Jesus will probably come in the weird, possibly even in absolutely terrifying ways for you that you didn't ever think were possible. But why? Have you ever wondered this? Like, this question bothered you? Like, why does Jesus' rescue have to be so weird? Why can't Jesus just do something within what we expect? Like, just heal, just come and do something within what we think. Why does Jesus have to always be so out there? Have you ever wondered that? Have you ever wondered that why question? And I know sometimes we think, well, the why question's not one we should ask of the Lord. You know, that idea that God's ways are higher than ours and ours isn't to ask why, so just let him be and go along with it. But to be honest, I actually don't think that there's ever a time when Jesus doesn't do something with really deep purposes in mind and great intentionality. And so with a humble heart, I think asking the why question of how he breaks in is actually really powerful. And so let's ask it here. Why? In this situation the disciples faced. For the disciples that night, like doing what Jesus asked them and then being hit by the wind and the waves and the storm all night on that sea. Why did Jesus come for them by walking on the water in a way that at first absolutely terrified the disciples? Why? Like, was it a show of his power? Did he think, man, this will really wow them? Or did he get some sort of morbid satisfaction out of seeing them have a freak out party on the boat there that night when they first saw him? Did he think, oh, this will really get them? Or was it practical? Like, had the disciples taken the only boat and Jesus needed to get to them after praying and he wasn't a good swimmer? So he thought, well, I'll just walk. Like is that why? And I, to be honest, don't think that any of those are an adequate explanation for what was going on. But I did want to share with you this story from my life that I think might shed some light on the situation. Years ago, when my son Isaiah was really young, he developed this desire to skate on a skateboard, and he'd seen some videos on YouTube and he wanted to learn how to skate. So we got him a skateboard and we end up in a car park just outside our place, and Isaiah, full of desire, steps on that skateboard for the first time. And you know what happened? It shoots out from underneath his feet and it rolls down, and he chases it and he brings it back. And he says, hang on to me, so hang on to him as he steps on, and gently he starts to roll around, but it's so awkward for him and he struggles to keep his balance, and he comes to a stop, and the moment he puts a foot down to propel himself, the board again shoots away from under him. And it doesn't take long for him, facing his struggles, in his desire to become a skateboarder. It doesn't take long for him to get disappointed and tired and discouraged. And you know what? In that moment, I grabbed that skateboard from him and I said, Isaiah, watch this. I put the skateboard down on the ground. I haven't skated recently, but I did do a lot of skating in the past. And I stepped on that board and I propelled myself off, jumped up on that board, did some turns and carved my way down that car park. Did a little bit of tic-tac as I came back toward him, rolled on that skateboard, and when I got close to him, I kicked the flip and kicked the board up into my arm, and I said, there you go, mate. Now why would I do that in front of Isaiah in the moment of his discouragement and his frustration? Is it because of the wow factor? Did I want him to see, wow, look what I can do? Or was it practical? Did I have to go from A to B in that moment? No, none of those are an adequate explanation. I did that for Isaiah in that moment because when he was frustrated and tired with skateboarding, what I wanted him to see is that with me, he could push past the limitations and the frustrations and his disappointments, and he would be able to learn a new thing. I wanted to show him that with me, if he just took some time to journey with me, he could break through into a new reality and become a better skateboard rider than he had ever dared to dream for himself. It was an invitation from me in that moment that there was a new way for him to journey in skating. And you know, I think this is what Jesus was on about when he came to his disciples walking on the water that night. It was Jesus showing his disciples that with him, there was another way for them to journey with Jesus that was just far better than they'd ever dared dream. See, in the struggles, the disciples only knew to stay in the boat, to grab an oar and start to row and to contend in that way against the wind and the waves. And they probably envisaged that when Jesus came for them, that they expected him just to calm the storm like they'd seen him do before. But Jesus came walking on the water. No boat. No struggling against the danger of the wind and the waves. No calming the storm this time. And no exhaustion and struggling. Just walking on the water freely, safely, effortlessly. And it's like Jesus was saying, hey, I want to show you there's a new way for you. You can bust through your limitations that you know, and there's a new way for you to journey with me through these difficulties. It's like Jesus was saying to his disciples, hey, when you're with me, the possibilities of what you can do, well, they just change everything. They're bigger than you've ever dreamed. It's like Jesus was saying, when you're with me, actually the wind and the waves, they aren't actually as relevant as you think they are. And they certainly don't author the day. It's like Jesus was saying, when you're with me, you'll be able to push beyond your known and journey in the impossible in ways like you've never dreamed. This was an invitation from Jesus. That in the midst of the buffeting of the wind and waves, it was an invitation for them to go beyond, to step into their impossible, to go beyond their familiar and their safety, and to move in belief to where Jesus was in the new, in the completely transforming, in the powerful kingdom purposes and ways that they'd never dreamed for themselves, to be honest. Peter got it. Peter was the only one who got it that night. Because as soon as Jesus said, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid, Peter picked up on the fact that this wasn't Jesus just doing something freakish for the wow factor. This was an invitation. This was Jesus saying, you can do this too. And so Peter says, okay, Jesus, if this is really you, tell me to come to you on the water. And Jesus calls Peter's bluff. He calls it, okay, Peter, you said it, so let's do this. And in that moment, and this is so cool, Peter stepped out of the boat. Imagine that. for that moment. He lets go of his theology and he stepped beyond the limits of his own paradigm. He actually stepped beyond what would have even been considered wise or safe to do in that moment. He stepped towards his fears and straight into the impossible. And at Jesus' confirmed direction, Peter stepped in pure trust toward Jesus. And as the wind howled and as the waves crashed, Peter left those tiresome oars and the boat and walked on top of the water with Jesus. Ha ha. Ha ha ha. And this is the very reason why we're stopping here in this story, right? Because many would know that when you read further in this story, Peter has these doubts and he begins to sink. And Jesus reaches out and rescues him and asks that question, oh, why do you doubt? And our whole colour of this story goes more to that, Peter's failures and all of that. But when we do that, we miss this. We miss this. That at this point, nothing had changed in the circumstances. Nothing had changed with the wind and with the waves. That was all still going on. But Jesus had come. And Peter had responded in courageous faith and obedience. And now here was this moment. Peter was walking through the wind and waves on top of the water with Jesus. And he was free and he was unafraid. I don't think he was struggling anymore. Even though the wind howled and the wind broke, I reckon this was one of Peter's greatest moments. Greatest exhilaration with Jesus. But more than that, do you know, I don't think anybody else has ever done this with Jesus. I think Peter and Jesus had a moment out there on the water that night where they looked at each other in the moment of walking on top of the water, and Peter thought, this is awesome. Look what just me gets to do with Jesus. I don't think anybody else has actually walked on top of water with Jesus in the storm and the winds. It was just something in Jesus' plan for Peter that they got to do uniquely together. So I want you to get this. Jesus will always come, but he'll probably come in new ways. They might even seem confusing. They might seem untimely, paradigm-busting ways. But he's not doing it to be annoying. And he's not doing it just for the wow factor. He's doing it because he wants to take you to new horizons through your storms and through your difficulties and limitations with him. He's doing it because he knows there are far more powerful ways that he wants to journey with you than you would ever imagine or dream for yourself. And he's doing it because he knows you cannot take yourself there. You need him to break in and take you to new realities. He wants to break you through your known and familiar, and he wants to bring about more kingdom power and purpose in and through your life than you would ever dream. And so when you face the wind and the waves, Jesus will always come for you. But he'll come in unfamiliar and unexpected. And it's an invitation. Peter experienced this with Jesus that night. Peter and only Peter walked on the water with Jesus. No one else got to do that. And I can't help but wonder when we have a look at this story, what are the outside your familiar, unexpected, untimely, seemingly weird ways in which Jesus is going to come for you? As you journey in what he's called you to do, and as you experience the unique and specific difficulties that come as you do that, what are the ways that Jesus is going to break into your unique personal situation? Outside the ways you've expected, what's he going to do? And secondly, it makes me wonder, what are the things of Jesus' power and presence and giftedness and kingdom purpose that are beyond your wildest dreams that Jesus has planned for only you and him to do together in all of history? Beautiful, powerful, personal moments where your eyes will meet Jesus in the midst of some challenges and difficulties you face, and you'll be doing your own walking on water with Jesus' journey, and your eyes will lock with his, and you'll think, wow, this is great, as you step beyond your known and your familiar. Look what we get to do together, Jesus, in the middle of your storm. Just to finish with today, there's two moments I love in this story that I just really thought were for us. That first moment when the disciples were terrified. They were moving with Jesus. They were in the storm and Jesus was breaking in, but at first they didn't recognize him and they were terrified. And Jesus, I just want to ask in this moment, I believe you are already breaking into the situations of listeners as they seek to move with you, but maybe there's not the understanding and the sight around it yet. Maybe there's even terror. Well, Jesus, will you come and open the eyes of our hearts to be able to recognize how you are breaking into our situations. And may some even hear those beautiful words right now from you, Jesus. Don't be afraid. It is I. Take courage. The second moment that I love is when Peter said, if it's you, Jesus, tell me to come. And that moment where he just stepped beyond his known and in trust with Jesus and experienced something greater with Jesus than he'd ever dreamed possible. And so again, I want to pray in Jesus' name that as you take steps of courage and obedience that are beyond your normal and into the impossible, despite your fears and the challenges that are around, oh, come Holy Spirit, and bring such powerful experiences of deliverance and provision and protection and ability in the kingdom with you, Jesus, that just makes our head spins. And may there be many moments this week where people lock eyes with you, Jesus, and say, wow, look what we get to do together, just you and me, as you lead me on. Come, Holy Spirit, and thank you for this beautiful moment. And in the storm that night, Jesus, with your disciples, may we learn heaps from it. And may your glory be seen. Amen.